Hello, Europe people. Well, anybody that's interested in Europe. I've just read the Ambrose Evans Pritchard latest Euro article in the Telegraph. Now, I think there's enough in it that is too much in it, maybe, to put in a World Economic News video. So I thought I'd have a go at it on its own. It's instructive about what's going on in Euroland, which is obviously the intention, because that's what he's expert in. It's entitled Spain Tempts Fate with Minimalistic Bank Rescue. Spain has set in motion a partial nationalisation of its crippled savings banks, or cajas, but stopped short of the giant rescues deemed necessary by some experts to contain the country's festering crisis. And I think this is worth having a go at directly because Portugal is Portugal, but it's only little, like Ireland and Greece. Spain is a big monster thing to go wrong. And I think most everyone believes that if Spain goes seriously wrong, Italy will be the next one to be looked at. And that would be a very big boom, boom for the Eurozone. And maybe too much boom, boom. So Ambrose Evans Pritchard writes, Finance Minister Elena Salgado said capital injections into the cajas, these are kind of building societies for UK people, would in no way exceed 20 billion euro, with a large part coming from the private sector. It won't come from the private sector. Spanish banks will have to boost their core Tier 1 capital ratio to 8%, even stricter than the Basel III rules. We'll see that when we see it. This is unlikely to become a game changer and could potentially unwind the relief rally we have seen in the market, said Silvio Peruzzo, RBS Europe economist. So some banker says it's unlikely to be a game changer. It's just not enough. It's just not impressive. It's not. We know that the shock and awe things were not enough. They were just what do they call it? Smoke and mirrors. But this is just not even smoke and mirrors. It's not shock and awe. It's just not enough. We view 50 billion as the minimum recapitalization for the Spanish banking system that would restore investors' confidence, said the RBS boy. And again, that does seem to be the consensus, 50 billion at least, as a starting amount to recapitalize on bad bank loans. RBS said Spain remains caught in a vice of tightening fiscal policy and a deepening property slump that may culminate in a 40% fall in house prices, eroding the solvency of the cajas. The Madrid consultant R.R. de Cunha estimates the overhang of unsold homes at 1.2 million. Strangely, Spain's housing prices have held up really rather well. I think they're only down about 15%, and I just cannot see how they can hold this off any longer. When it goes, it'll go very quickly, and 40% seems to be understandable as an amount. And that's, as I say, they really haven't started falling precipitously yet, and the cajas are already in trouble. Mr. Peruzzo called on EU leaders to take much bolder action to overcome the crisis, demonstrating that they really mean to save Spain by beefing up the rescue machinery. EU ministers played for time at key meetings last week, giving the impression of complacency. But this is the market, the banks saying, come on, come in and save Spain, which is the same as it was for Greece and Ireland, which is come in and save us. That's all the bankman's saying there. A report by RBS said the real firepower of the EU's 440 billion euro bailout fund must greatly be increased to cope with the risk of a full-blown Iberian crisis. The fund should be allowed to buy Spanish and other Eurozone bonds preemptively and recapitalize the banks. It's just a repeat. The bank is saying, come in and buy the bonds that we're holding and recapitalize the banks with buying new bonds. In other words, come and bail us out. EU leaders are starting to recognise that the sort of loan packages provided to Greece and Ireland are no answer to a solvency crisis caused by excess debt, but have not yet agreed on a formula that allows these economies to claw their way back to health. In typical Ambrose fashion there, he mashes two things together. recognised the sort of loan packages provided to Greece and Ireland are no answer to the solvency crisis caused by excess debt. All right, maybe he's talking about just the countries, but they have not agreed to a formula that allows these economies to claw their way back to health. Of course you can't. I mean, they're just inefficient economies burdened with far, far, far too much debt. There comes a time, and these countries are past that time, where you cannot claw your way back. The burden is too heavy and they have to default. RBS said there is a risk that new proposals in the pipeline will not be forceful enough to mark a turning point in the Eurozone's drama. It said Spain will remain exposed to contagion unless the EU takes preemptive action. Again, this is just the banks saying, come in and put taxpayer money on the line so we can hoover it all up. Goldman Sachs takes a rosier view, deeming Spain to be fundamentally solvent. It estimates further Calla losses at 15 billion. Even if Spain slips into a double-dip recession this year under a pessimistic scenario, public debt will peak below 90% of GDP. Exports are recovering with car shipments at record high. Yes, but it's hard to argue with Goldman because they get so right so much of the time. But that's their pessimistic scenario, that things are going to go wrong. The way I look at it, and the way the RBS man and quite a lot of other people I've been that would be a really optimistic solution. So it's strange that Goldman's most pessimistic is the equivalent of quite a lot of analysts' most optimistic estimation of how things are going to turn out. Analysts are split over the true state of the Callas. Arturo de Frias at Evolution Security said parts of Spain's banking system look Irish. The problem ratio on 439 billion of property debt may reach 60%. We calculate a worst case of 140 billion of future impairments. I mean, that's debts going wrong, not being paid off. 60 odd billion for the banks and 80 odd billion for the Callas. Banks have got much more room for manoeuvre than a savings bank, a building society type thing, who have just got money, deposit to put in that they lend out. You know, there's not that much room for manoeuvre. But the bigger banks, you know, they can have bondholders and other people coming in, putting capital in there. It's much easier for the banks. This is why the Callas, they're very fixed. Anyway, moving on. Brussels clearly fears that Spain is still at risk. Olli Rehn, the EU's economic commissioner, called for urgent action to beef up the rescue fund, this is the EFSF thing, before the next spasm of debt jitters. We need to agree as quickly as possible. The recent lull in the market tensions give us breathing room, but we can't sit back. We must act now with full determination, he told Die Welt. Olli Rehn knows it's coming, and coming it is. Mr. Rehn said EU leaders must redesign the bailout funds so that you can lend a full 440 billion. If you buy a Mercedes with 440 horsepower, you want all that 440 horsepower, he said, which is just Weasley's silly little words. As I said before in other things, the 440 billion can't be lent. That's the size of the fund, but you can only lend 250 billion because they had to have that huge buffer above the 250 billion to 440 billion, so they can get a AAA rating on it. The EFSF has a lending limit of near 250 billion owing to the need for extra collateral to anchor its AAA rating. EU experts are exploring ways to boost the total without needing fresh money from member states, which would entail a Bundestag vote at a bad moment before regional elections. I think there are elections coming on in March. They have support from German Finance Minister Wolfgang Schäuble, who said the EU cannot keep stumbling from one crisis to the next, but the Free Democrats and Bavaria Socialist Christians are still dragging their feet within the ruling coalition. Again, problem with politicians and that sort of thing is they're in a coalition, and you need to keep everybody on board. Schäuble is one of Merkel's henchmen, I think. Yeah, he is, and he's surprisingly pushing forward with very EU type things. He's quite happy to put German taxpayers' money on the line, from what I can gather. Guido Westerwelle FDP leader has sounded Eurosceptic over recent weeks, accusing EU officials of trying to bounce Germany into signing a blank cheque for a transfer union, arguably in breach of both German and EU treaty law. He admonishes EU officials for their ex cathedra demands, reminding them that the rescue fund remains a prerogative of the member states that pay for it. The first part of that is the transfer union would be like the United States, with a central unit as its heart that would take money from Germany and Austria and Holland and Finland and give it to Ireland, Greece, Spain and Italy and Portugal. They would transfer money from the rich to the poor, making everybody awfully jolly happy. It bothers me that some in Europe seems to think that nothing has happened in this financial crisis and think they can solve the problem by taking on fresh debt. This is the Westerwelle fella, invoking the name of Ludwig Erhard, the free market apostle who created the foundations of the post-war German miracle, and I believe is really quite set in the heads of many German people. Jean-Claude Juncker, head of Eurogroup, said FDP's new tone is alarming. I think Juncker's tone is alarming, but he says, I think he's a Luxembourger. I am appalled by how some German liberals are compromising their European political heritage. Compromising their European political heritage. In other words, look, for the last 20 years we've held hands and sung songs together and pushed on with this Euro project of ours. It is deeply painful for me to see that some in the FDP are now flirting with a populist course regarding Europe. A populist course. Anybody that knows what a populist course is? I imagine it's representing what the people want, and as the EU always knows, the people are horrendously ignorant and must be ignored. Mr. Juncker said icily that Germany was not the only country in Europe with a AAA rating, and is not the only contributor to the EU bailouts. We could criticise the Greeks, Portuguese and others more credibly if Germany and France hadn't violated the Stability Pact on purpose in 2003, he said. And how are they going to sort this all out when a top man in it, Juncker, is throwing things like that about? I mean, it's perfectly true, but is it going to politically get everyone together to do something, when it's quite clear from the rest of the article the things that the people want to do are very, very, very diverse? And saying things like that, I would think that Juncker is just driving stakes in between everybody, and I think the chances of these European people getting together, but that's the thing, you've got the Euro people on one side and the representatives of the actual countries that are members of the Euro on the other. And not even, it's two sides, it's just so diverse, it's like a mosaic. I don't know how they're going to make sense of any of this at all, and at the basis of it is money, contracts written on bits of paper that are real legal documents, and it's very, very, very hard to do all this political smoke and mirrors stuff when you've got this solid legal document saying A owes B this much money. It's very hard to get round easily, and I don't think they're going to do it anyway. Link to the Ambrose Evans Pritchard article in the Telegraph, but I think it's a fine example of showing how the Eurozone is going to struggle getting itself together because itself is not together. Thanks, bye.